Welcome to Top of the Hops. I'm your host, Mike Riker, and joining me today is a friend and, more importantly, the host of not only the greatest wrestling radio show in America, but the greatest radio show, period. And that's
Ah,
my
thank you.
friend, Dave LaGreca. Dave, thanks so much for joining us.
Of course, Mike. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited about the episode today.
So, this show is called Top of the Hops. It's about beer and it's about some of our favorite things. We'll start with the beer first. Obviously, with you being a wrestling aficionado, I had to do a wrestling show with you. And of course, the topic today is your favorite, your number one on the Mount Rushmore, your number one overall, the great Ric Flair. Not my number one, my number two. But I will say, going over these matches, and I'm not, this is the first top five I'm doing. I gotta say, this might be the hardest one I've ever done.
It's a tough one, but you mentioned the beer, so
Yeah, what do we got?
obviously, so I have a few things that I want to
Okay.
show you.
Okay,
A few
cool.
beers that I got ready, and the one that I'm drinking today. Um, you know, got my in the fridge the
Ah, that's
Broken
a great one.
Skull IPA. I really love his All American Lager.
Okay, I haven't
It's
tried that one, so that's
It's
good.
very good for the
Okay,
summer. It's very light. This obviously is pretty thick, but
right.
it goes down pretty easy. But the All American Lager is a big hit for me.
Okay.
Um, but I also have this crazy one. It's from Hoof Hearted Breweries,
I
and
know
it's
which one
called
you talk. I know which one you talk about. Iron Sheik and
it,
Hulk Hogan.
yeah, it's the Combat Spandex, and it's got like a weird like mango kiwi vanilla flavor to it. I know you're gonna have Ken Reedy on one of the
Yes.
episodes. I think I'm pretty positive I let him try it. I don't think he was a big fan. It's okay. It's good for the summer as well.
That's actually one of my favorites. I love that one.
And then I am a big fan of the beer that I'm drinking today, and this is in my LaGreca's Daddy Soda glass
I gotta
that
get one of those.
you can get at podswag.com/busted open. And then this is Landshark.
I love Land Shark. You know what's funny, Dave? When, to pull the curtain back a little bit, when I asked you to do this episode, you were like, you love the idea, but you're not much of a beer drinker. So, and I was like that, just like you. I didn't really start beer drinking until like 7 years ago. Everything was like Bud and Coors and all that stuff, and I wasn't a big fan of that. But one of the first beers I ever had was a Land Shark, and I was one of the first ones I actually didn't think it was that bad.
Yeah, and it's the summer, so
Yep,
obviously I drink a lot of Landshark. I drink Corona.
right.
Those are like just really good like summer beers that go down easy.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
Yeah, and the beer I'm drinking is also the company is also one of the first ones I had. I remember being at a bar and they gave me what's called a Blue Moon, and Blue Moon actually has what's called a mango wheat, and it's very refreshing, great for the summer. Very, it's like 5.5%, not that much as alcohol as far as alcohol intake. But I had a Blue Moon at a bar one time. They put an orange slice in the
Yeah.
in the glass, and I loved it. And this their mango wheat's probably my favorite. And what's great about Blue Moon is you can get it like at any grocery store, so it isn't like you have to like go and seek it at some beer distributor. So I got this actually at my local grocery store, and I love it. It's just like my
And
third one this week.
and it's funny because you're drinking Blue Moon from a can. It's like if and I'm not a big soda drinker, but when I drink soda, I prefer soda from a can than a bottle. But when it comes to beer, I prefer it in a bottle over a can.
Yeah, see, I'm the opposite. See, I like beer from a can. And if you notice, there's not a lot of beers that come in bottles anymore. But if you give me like a Coke, I love that. I used to love the old Coke bottles. I used to
Yeah.
get like in the delis. I used to always get those.
So it's just funny. I kind of like when it comes to soda, that metallic taste to it. But when it comes to the beer, I never. It's very rare. I just kind of did this because I wanted to promote my busted open glass.
I gotta
My
get one. I'm gonna buy one after this.
But we have a bunch of pint glasses at Podswag. You can get one, a Dave LaGreca glass. There's a Tommy and Mark and Bully glasses as well. So yeah, definitely go to podswag.com/busted open. Really great beer, pint glasses available.
And another thing that's available, I saw today, is the bathing suit.
Yes, got
I
the,
love the
just
bathing
in time
suit.
for the summer. Got the busted open bathing
I
suit
love it. I love it.
and women one piece
Oh,
suits
tremendous.
as well. So definitely check that out.
Well, I'm gonna take my first, well, actually my second swig of the beer, and it's a great, like I said, it's a great mango wheat, very good, very refreshing, great for the summertime. Okay, let's get to it. So obviously, we're talking Ric Flair today. We've had this debate over and over, me and you, as far as Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, um, and we'll get into it another time. But I listen, like I said before, this was one of the toughest things I've ever done. We could have done top 10, top 20 matches with Rick, and still have a bunch left over.
Yeah,
So I want to
I,
start with you,
mhm.
um, with your top five, and kind of like go over it and tell me what you think.
Well, yeah, but I figured before I get into my top five, and you're right, it was very tough. And really, with the exception of my number one, Mike, I love to do lists. So I have like my book of laminated lists, and I went over it last night in preparation for this show. And what I had as my top five, probably for like the last decade, actually, when I looked over it, I changed it. So
Really?
my number one is still the same, but my top five is there. And honestly, if we had this discussion a year from now, 2 years from now, it could be different too. Because like you said, Mike, like he's had so many amazing matches
Mm-hmm.
that and there's probably matches that we have never even seen
Right.
or just at in the arena, which brings me to my next point. I have like kind of three like kind of honorable mentions, and
Okay.
they're more about just like a personal connection
Mm-hmm.
than actual like greatest matches. One I have the program here.
Nice.
August 16th, 1985. Ric Flair, the main event that night was Ric Flair against Sergeant Slaughter.
Wow.
And that was at the Meadowlands. And if you remember, Mike, when you were producing Busted Open, we did a show inside the Meadowlands
Yes.
where we interviewed a bunch of current WWE superstars and legends, and that was right before WrestleMania 29 in New
Mm-hmm.
Jersey. And I got to interview Sergeant Slaughter. I actually have another copy of this that's framed on my wall
Wow.
with that autographed by him. Then I have this one, and this was at the Meadowlands as well, from February 24th, 1986. And the main event that night was Ric Flair against Magnum TA.
Oh, wow.
And it was actually at that time, if you remember, Ric Flair didn't get a lot of like clean victories over
Mm-hmm.
opponents like around 1986, but he did that night against Magnum TA. And then I have this one, which is my all-time favorite like wrestling show, and it's and I have the program here. It was an AWA NWA joint Pro Wrestling USA show, Star Wars '85, and it was Ric Flair against Harley Race.
Wow. That's tremendous.
So and like this is one of my all-time favorite cards. Listen to this: Bob Backlund, Billy Robinson, Jay Youngblood, Mark Youngblood, and Jimmy Valiant against Larry Zbyszko, Dory Funk Jr., and Nick Bockwinkel. Greg Gagne and Jim Brunzell against the Masked Superstar and Mr. Saito. Ivan and Nikita Koloff against Steve Kern and Jimmy Boogie Woogie Man
Oh,
Valiant.
wow. Where's
Um,
Stan Lane?
No, I guess he didn't make it that night, so
Yeah.
Jimmy Valiant had to fill in. The Road Warriors against Jerry Lawler and Baron von Raschke. Rick Martel against Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin for the AWA Championship, and then Ric Flair Harley Race for the NWA Championship.
This might be a stupid question. Is there any signs of video of that show? Any
There
signs of?
is.
There is. Okay.
If you go to YouTube, they don't have the whole card,
Right.
but they have the Road Warriors, Jerry Lawler, Baron Von Raschmatch, Ric Flair, Harley Racer, Rick Martel, Gorgeous Jimmy
Oh,
Garvin.
really? I
Those
definitely have to
match,
look
and
at those.
it's from a telecast in Japan. So it's not
Wow,
American commentary, it's Japanese commentary.
that's amazing.
It's real, it's fantastic. And it's one of my all-time favorite cards because that was the first joint AWA NWA show in this area. And you know, to be able to see like the Road Warriors, Rick, like all those guys at that time on the same card, it was pretty special.
Yeah, I don't know how much of an NWA guy you were when you were young. So seeing that at the Meadowlands of all places, I mean, it must have been so special for you.
Yeah, and I had gone a little bit earlier. There was just an NWA show at the
Right.
Meadowlands. And the main event was Ric Flair, Ricky Steamboat, which was tremendous.
I'm
But
sure.
this one I liked a little bit more because the AWA at that time was right before that company collapsed. So
Mhm.
you still had, you know, Rick Martel, Nick Bockwinkel, the Road Warriors
Right.
were part of the AWA at that time. So yeah, that was pretty special. So those are kind of like my emotional connection Ric Flair matches. You know, going up against Magnum TA, Sergeant Slaughter, and of course Harley Race.
Yeah, it's funny with Rick, I've talked about this before. Rick was listen. I was always a face guy. Even when I was young, I always rooted for the good guys. He was the first, and I got to include the Horseman with this, the first heel that I couldn't hate. Like
Yeah.
I always, even like in his matches with Ronnie Garvin or even his matches with Dusty, I kind of rooted for him because he was just that good. Of course, when he met Magnum TA and all those guys from Mid South, I always rooted against them. But whenever I saw him on Mid Atlantic with Georgia Championship Wrestling or Crockett, man, it was tough to not root for him.
No, and then like even like getting to see, you know, Magnum TA
Hmm.
against Ric Flair because Magnum TA shortly after that was, you know, in the car accident and never got to
Right.
see him wrestle again. So um that was like a big deal. He was, and Magnum TA was really the next guy.
Yeah, yeah. I heard your guys' interview with him a couple weeks ago, with you, Bully, and Tommy. He was just it was so good. It brought back a lot of memories. I love the story about him and Bret Hart in the bar, uh, which was tremendous.
And you know what's crazy is that match with Magnum TA and Ric Flair was in 1986. And that's when
Right.
Magnum TA got, you know, that card was from February of 1986, and he got into his acts in October of 1986.
So you think in '86 instead of Flair Nikita that should have been Flair Magnum?
Probably.
Okay. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
because Magnum had just lost the U.S. title to Nikita in that best of seven, right?
Yeah, but I think like, and if you watch the Dark Side of the Ring with Magnum TA, it was really like 87 was
Mm,
going to be his year. They were grooming him for 1987. And of course, that's when the WWE really took over
right.
the pro wrestling world. Would they have been able to have done that if they had somebody like Magnum TA at the top? Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, listen, I loved him in Mid South. Growing up watching him, and that's one of my favorite all time feuds. And this is like another list we could do. Is feud with Mr. Wrestling too. As his protege and him bringing him up, and I love Magnum from the start. It's a shame what happened, and you're right, Dave. Whether it be '86 or '87, I mean, all the talk even back then was he was being the next guy. He was going to be the face of NWA.
But that's the way life is, and
Yeah.
it can go either way. And it's pretty crazy, but here we are. Like we're talking about Ric Flair. Ric Flair was the veteran going up
Yeah.
against the Magnum TA in 1986, and this past summer we still saw Ric Flair in the ring.
Yeah,
You
it's
know,
crazy.
so it's pretty crazy. But I'm interested to see if any of my matches
Mm.
in my top five are on yours. I know for sure two of them are on your
All
list.
right, we'll see about that.
Okay.
Let's start. We'll start with you. Go from
So do you want
five
to
to
go
one.
5-5-4-4-3-3-2-2-1-1?
We could do that. We could do that.
Okay.
Yeah, and if we have the same match, that's fine. So let's go. You start. You're the guest. Let me
All
hear it.
right. So at number 5, and this match wasn't in my top 5. It was in my top 10, but not my top 5. But the more I watch this match, the more I fall in love with it. It tells you a great story in the ring. Like, obviously, it was a great story going into this match, but I don't even think you need to watch any of the TV that led up to this match. Just watching this match alone, you know the story. It's just an amazing match, and that's Ric Flair, Shawn Michaels from WrestleMania 24, the end of his career match. And Mike, you were there. You booked Shawn Michaels on Busted Open when Shawn Michaels mentioned to us on the air that he was the ring general in that match, which is the way it should have been at that point in Ric Flair's career. But that final goodbye for Ric Flair, at least for that point, but obviously his last match in the WWE. What a great story. The I'm sorry, I love you. The super kick to get that final pinfall. Great match. Great commentary as well. Ric Flair, Shawn Michaels, number 5 on my top 5 list.
Well, just to show you that I'm not lying, my number 5 was also Ric Flair, Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 24. You're right, Dave. I love everything about this match. It was funny, I wasn't crazy about the actual story with Vince saying that, hey, if you lose, you retire. He had a match with MVP at Royal Rumble. He had a match with Chris Masters, I think, at some point. So it was kind of whole hum. But once Shawn got involved in that storyline, I mean, it just picked up. And what I love about the match is that Rick almost harkened back to 83. You have that spot, where Rick comes off the top rope where 99% of the time he fails. But this one time, almost a la Harley Race in 83, he hits him with the flying body press. It's like Ric Flair, it's like the greatest hits of Ric Flair in that match. I love that match. Shawn was the perfect opponent. You got Jim Ross on the call, which is great.
Yep.
Orlando, the whole weekend was awesome. I love you talk about you didn't need to know what the story was, just watch that match. But the story leading up to it, one of my favorite things about the story is when Shawn Michaels is in the ring and calls him Old Yeller. He's got to put him down. And the
Yeah.
emotion of Ric Flair of just going absolutely crazy about what Shawn just said to him. He couldn't believe it. And smacked him. Basically, I think he slapped Shawn in the face. Just the lead up into that match was tremendous. I love that match. To me, it's probably the most emotional match in the history of wrestling. You can see both guys crying. The spot where Shawn does the body press onto the announcer's table, which looked like it hurt like hell. But like you said, the match is great. It shows that Ric Flair went on top. And to me, Dave, I know he's done other things in TNA. He had, a good match against Mick Foley. His last match, like I said, last year or whatever it was. But to me, that was the final match for Ric Flair.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's funny, and I just remembered it as you were saying, you mentioned that harkening back to Starrcade 83, even the robe he wore.
Yes.
Yeah, and that was always my favorite robe, was the one at Starrcade 83, the blue and the silver robe. And then he wore the blue and silver robe going to the ring. It was not the same robe, but it was like the same design and the same colors as the one that really, to me, kickstarted his career in 1983 when he beat Harley Race for the NWA Championship. Wasn't his first reign as champion, but I think that was the first meaningful reign for Flair. So it definitely went full circle that night.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the previous WrestleMania, he was in the dark match. So, I
Yeah.
mean, for a couple of years, Ric Flair really wasn't, in the spotlight in WWE. So once that 2008 came and they went with that storyline, like I said, to me, that's Ric Flair's best match over those last 3 or 4 years of his career.
All right. Number 4. And, we mentioned Starrcade before. This is from Starrcade 93, and that's the Vader Flair match. Harley Race in the corner of Vader. I love that match. It's not a match that's talked about enough, I don't think. Obviously,
Agreed.
things got a little rough things got a little stiff, things got a little bit bloody. But the reason I love this match and why it deserves to be in the top five, unlike any other match that's in my top five, is the clash of styles.
Mm.
Like, you talk about Shawn Michaels and some of the other wrestlers I'm going to mention in my top five. You could see it. You could understand the chemistry. Like, this was completely different. This was not Ric Flair. Like, it's almost like he had he was like the away team. He didn't have the home field advantage. Vader, a bruiser, a big man, completely clash of styles, but it worked for Flair.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked how, more than using the moves, Flair was using his fists. And you didn't see that a lot when it came to Ric Flair. And,
Right.
my number 4 is Vader Flair from Starrcade 93. Believe it or not, it is the only match in my top 5 that is from Starrcade. With all the great matches
Wow.
that Flair had at Starrcade, this is the only match in my top 5 that's from Starrcade.
Interesting. So my number 4, which I know is on your list, and that's the I Quit match against Terry Funk. I don't want to spoil your sentiments about the match. I'm going to go just a little short here, but listen, people talk about Flair and Steamboat in '89. Flair Funk in '89 was just as tremendous as far as a feud.
Yeah.
And what I loved about it was it went from Flair Steamboat, athletic competition for the title to this blood feud. It was like, and what's great about Rick is that I do enjoy him as a heel, but as a face, he's just as good, Dave. In that match, he was, like I said, he had that, the neck injury. I wrestled War against Steamboat, where Funk did that pile driver on the table. But Funk is also just as good in this match. He plays the perfect heel in the fact that he's wild and crazy. He plays the coward. He just controls the match so perfectly. And their match, even at the Very American Bash, I thought was underrated. But this match is so good. It's so great. You have Flair, Funk, two of the great icons in the sport. Um, Funk tries to cheat the win. Flair, thwarts him in every move, and just the end of it where, you're breaking my goddamn leg. It's just a great match. It kind of gets lost in a way because it was a Clash of Champions. It was in Troy, New York. Not a hotbed as far as wrestling, but that match. And I'm gonna give you the 4 when it comes. I know it's on your top 5, but I love that match, and that's my number 4.
All right. So, yeah, more about that later.
Yes.
So now we go to number 3. And obviously, these matches are going to be spread probably in anybody's top 5 list. And I have 2 of them on this list, and that's Steamboat Flair. But at number 3, I have the Wrestle War 1989 match, which was the 3rd match in that series. And listen, like, Mike, you could put all 3 of those matches in your top 5, all 3 as one of your number 1. Like, it's a tremendous series of matches. It's funny. I probably, believe it or not, appreciate it more now than I did then, because you talked about it. That series of matches went right into Funk, and it got very personal when it went to Funk.
Yeah.
So it sounds crazy saying that. It almost was like they moved on from Steamboat to Funk so quick that you really didn't have time to digest it and realize how important that series was or how great that series was, because you went from one immediately into the other.
Steamboat never got a rematch after Russell.
That's what I'm saying. You could have had a 4th match.
Right, absolutely.
But because it went right into Funk and it was so personal, and the way they went to Funk and how they did it, really didn't appreciate that series, I think, until really it was like in the early 2000s, Mike, is when they came out with WWE came out with the DVD Ric Flair set. It was like a 3-disc Ric Flair greatest matches. And I want to say that came out like 2004, I want to say, maybe around that time. And that's when I went back and I watched it, and I really appreciate it. Don't get me wrong, I loved it when it happened, but that's when I went back and watched it, and I was like, wow.
Yeah.
that was even better than what I thought at the time
Mm.
of watching it. And that third match, obviously, that set up everything that happened with Funk. And it's crazy when you read Flair's book, even Steamboat. Steamboat didn't know about what was about to happen. He was leaving that ring. He was walking out of that ring and going back to the dressing room area, thinking, all right, I'm probably going to get another matchup from Flair. And then all that stuff happened with Funk. And he didn't even realize that that was going to happen. And they quickly moved off of Steamboat right into Funk. But 1989, Mike, and again, you didn't know it at the time. You could go back and say that's one of the top 5 years in
Oh,
pro
great
wrestling,
point.
just based on what the NWA/WCW was doing, at that time. And it was an incredible amount of fantastic matches, to the point that I think both on my list and your list, you're going to hear a lot about 1989 on these lists.
Yeah, you can argue, Dave, that 1989 might have been one of the greatest, maybe the greatest year a wrestler has ever had.
Yeah.
With Flair. I mean, you go. I mean that feud started in January, on TV with him and Wyndham against Steamboat and Eddie Gilbert, and that which, by the way, is a great match. I just watched it a couple weeks ago, and then goes right into February Chi-Town Rumble, into April with the Clash of Champions, into May with your number three, and then goes right, like you said, it goes right into Funk, which lasts all the way to November. So,
Yep.
and those matches were incredible too. So you can argue that that 1989 might be the greatest year a wrestler's ever had.
Yeah, and when you think of Ric Flair, you don't think of 1989, right? You think
Right.
of 83, 84, 85. One of my favorite Ric Flair feud is the feud with Dusty,
Mm-hmm.
but yet none of those matches are in my top five. But I think that's a lot when people think of Ric Flair, they think of that early to mid 80s period, but 1989, like you said, may have been no, I'm not even gonna say may. I think that was the greatest year of his career.
Yeah, I can't argue with it, Dave. My number three was your number four, and that's from 1983 Starrcade, Ric Flair versus Vader.
Wow.
Yeah, what I love about this match, Dave, is the story. Listen, the story is originally this was not supposed to be Flair versus Vader. This was supposed to be Sid versus Vader,
Yes.
and then the incident happened with the stabbing with Arn, the unfortunate incident there. And they pivoted to Flair, which was perfect because where was Starrcade? Charlotte, North Carolina, the home of
Perfect
Ric
place.
Flair. Perfect. And I loved everything about the story about this match. The beginning of the pay per view starts with where Mean Gene Oakland and Ric Flair. Ric Flair saying goodbye to his family. Saying goodbye to Charlotte and to David and to Reed and to his wife at the time, and getting in the limo and him and Gene, talking about his career, how this could be the end. Because remember, his career was on the line in this match as well, and just that whole story, that whole limo ride with me and Gene leading into it, and that's pay per view is a one match pay per view. There's nothing else on that pay per view that meant
No, it's a
anything.
terrible pay-per-view.
Terrible, terrible pay per view. And that crowd was not into anything. But once that music played for Flair, one of the loudest ovations you'll ever hear. I love the ending. There was some reports I saw that didn't like the ending. I love the ending of that match.
I
You
do
know,
too.
Flair injuring Vader's leg and then rolling him up. And like you said before, that is it's not a typical Ric Flair match with all the wrestling holds. He went in there and fought
Yes.
almost fought for his career. And that's what I love about that match. Vader's vastly underrated, especially his WCW days. And that match with Ric Flair is one of my favorites.
And again, it's just, if you think about it, psychology wise, that's the way Flair should be wrestling. Like it's not about holds. It's like
Mm-hmm.
you're fighting for your career, you're fighting for your livelihood. So you're gonna punch, you're gonna strike.
Right, right.
And that's exactly what happened. And seeing like Flair's mouth all
Oh,
bloody
yes.
and everything, it's not what you normally see from Ric Flair. So yeah, I agree with that. And again, like your three, my four, it's in both in our top five. All
Mm-hmm.
right. So already we go to number two. And this is from your neck of the woods in New Orleans.
Mm.
Flair Steamboat Clash of Champions 6. The 2 out of 3 falls match. I even love the way that it ended, where it's
Yes.
like a little bit of controversy, like, whoa, he gets the, Steamboat gets the win, but wait, Flair's foot is under the rope, and then it's beautiful storytelling. It's not a big crowd, but the way that they even lit that stadium, you can't tell. I think there was only like 5,000 fans in the
Yeah.
stadium that night, which a stadium, and you know better than me, what, 70 holds about
Well,
75,000?
yeah. I mean, listen, I'm sure everybody was watching WrestleMania 5 at the time.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. I mean, right? I mean, they were opposite WrestleMania 5, which I think at the time had the biggest pay-per-view buys at that time with Hogan and Savage. So, most people were watching WrestleMania, not going to New Orleans to watch Flair Steamboat.
Well, not me. But but yes. For that again, you can't go wrong with any of those three matches, but even back in 1989, if you would have asked me, the Clash of Champions 6, Wrestle War 89 were always my two favorites of
Hmm.
those three matches.
Yeah, great number three. Number two, is that number two? Yeah, number two. Um, my number two goes to Clash of Champions. And the very first Clash of Champions, and that's his match with Sting. Um, what I love about this match, Sting to me, listen, I was a big Mid South UWF guy. He was part of the Blade Runners with the Ultimate Warrior, The Rock at the time. But even going into that match with Flair, he was still that mid card guy, that up and coming guy, not a main event guy, nothing like that. When I remember that match, I remember saying, "All right, this is gonna be a okay match. Flair's in it, nothing big." And what they did pulled out was tremendous. That match made Sting. I loved everything about that match. And what I love about the match, Dave, is that it felt like Flair was trying to hold on. Like Sting like thwarted him at every move. He had a reversal for everything. He, you know, everything Flair tried, he couldn't put away Sting, and it felt like almost that Ric Flair didn't. I know it was a time limit draw, but like he survived, and it almost felt like Sting won the match. Um, and after that, Sting was looked at totally different, and for that, his career boomed. Um, I just love everything about that match. I thought their chemistry was tremendous. Their 90 match at Great American Bash is very good. They had some excellent matches, on Nitro, but that first match to me is the epitome of making a guy.
Yeah, and it's crazy, Mike, is it's in my top 10, not my top 5, though that laminated list that I was telling you about, it was on that list. And I probably need to go back and watch that match again. It is tremendous. Say what you want about the judges,
Yeah,
which
that
they
puts a hurt on it. I get it.
takes a
I
little
agree.
bit away from the match. Um, but that being said, it made Sting. And Mike, I don't know if you agree or disagree. By far, I feel it's the greatest match in Sting's career.
Oh God, yeah, it's
It,
not even
it
close.
made it made Sting's career, but I don't think Sting ever touched that match again.
No,
And but it did make him a star.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think of other Sting matches, and this is not a detriment to Sting, but any matches I think of him that they're great, all involve Rick.
Yeah.
I mean, he's had a bunch of feuds with Hogan, but name me another match outside of Rick where Sting you have like, oh my God, that's an amazing match. No, it's not. It's always with Rick, and they
Yeah.
did have great chemistry.
And you could and again, we're not doing Flair justice. The
Oh,
matches he had with Luger, where
right,
Luger had, I think, his best matches
absolutely.
with another match that I have from Florida, the match he had with Barry Windham.
You know, I
Uh,
it's funny you say that, Dave. I wrestled so much putting that on the list because he had a match with him. I believe at the first was it the first Crockett Cup?
the first
First
Cup,
Crockett
that
Cup,
was
which
great,
is
and he had it with, I know Joe Koff was one of the promoters in Florida. The main event was Wyndham and Flair. Great
Battle of
match,
the is that the Battle of the Belts?
Battle of the
Yeah.
Belts.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, uh, th- this, and there was a videotape that I used to rent that had it. The match he had with Terry Taylor in the
Yeah.
Superdome,
Yes.
amazing. There's so many
Oh
matches.
God. Yeah.
not a great scientific match, but on an emotional level, the match Flair had with Kerry Von Erich at
Oh,
Texas Stadium when Kerry Von Erich won the NWA Championship. The matches, like I said, the matches he had with Harley Race.
yeah. I
Uh,
mean, we haven't mentioned Starcade '83, which is which some people would have in their top five.
the match with Dusty at the Great American Bash
Yep.
'86.
Yep.
You know, and Mike, I had that video cassette at Sirius XM for the longest time. That Great American Bash VHS, where was the main event was Dusty and Flair. That he had the Starcade '85, didn't get the finish that everybody wanted, and it led up to Dusty beating Flair at the Great American Bash in '86 in North Carolina. So many great opponents, so many
Yep.
great matches. It's almost like you have to do like a top 20 of
You're
Flair
right.
to really tell the story of his career, which again leads us to the number one, at least my number one. You mentioned it before, and it's the I Quit match, Flair Funk. And there's a dozen different reasons why I have this match at number one. One, it's a Clash of Champions. I've underrated, Clash of Champions. Being able to see Clash of Champions free for on TV.
Hmm.
Like that match you mentioned with Sting, that wasn't on a pay-per-view, that wasn't on closed circuit, that was free on
Right.
TV and did a monster number. You had an I Quit match where Mike, they told such a beautiful story. You didn't even need blood.
No.
Like you think about that. You had a match with the feud that Flair and Funk was having, and you didn't need blood in an I Quit match. Tommy Young, your referee, to me, who's still to me the greatest referee of all time, Tommy Young. Gordon Soley and Jim Ross on commentary.
Oh man.
Your number one and number two
Hmm.
greatest commentators of all time. Gary Michael Capetta, the ring announcer. Um, it's just an amazing, amazing event. Crowd was hot
Hmm.
for that match. That is and always will be my number one Ric Flair match.
Yeah, what I love about that match too, and I talked about it before, is like Flair. It's almost like a hardcore match, right? It was like out of Flair's comfortability almost. Like he wasn't used to that. And you talked about it before, and when you went from the athleticism and the wrestling with Steamboat into almost this blood feud with Terry Funk, and it almost like wasn't like his usual match. And I quit match with Ric Flair. You don't think of Ric Flair in that match, but this match was so great, Dave, that it's just and like I said, a lot of the credit has to go. We talk about Rick in this episode, but a lot of credit has to go to Terry Funk.
Yeah, and he wins with the figure four leg
Right.
lock. Terry Funk is amazing in that match. And you talk about everybody has their Mount Rushmore, their top five. That's my number one and number two. So you talk about the commentators, number one and two, number two. Ric Flair's my number one. Terry Funk's my number two of all time. Amazing, amazing match. And yep, Mike, I can't wait to hear your number one, but that's my top five.
Well, my number one is a match that was on your list, and that's the second of the three between Flair and Steamboat in '89 in New Orleans. Um, what why I love this match so much? I remember I was watching WrestleMania 5 at the time, and I remember just switching over just to see what was going on with Flair and Steamboat. I never went back to WrestleMania 5.
Yeah.
I was so enthralled with this match. Now, granted, listen, I'm a little biased because it did happen in New Orleans, where I've had so many memories with my dad watching wrestling matches. But that match is a work of art. I mean, Dave, name me one high spot in that match. You can't. There
You
isn't any.
can't, there isn't any.
And that match went close to 60 minutes, and it felt like it went 10.
Yeah,
Uh,
and Mike, it was my number two.
right.
And you're right. It's just the emotion in that match. You're right. There's no high spots. And we talked about it on Busted Open recently. The chemistry that Steamboat and Flair had together.
Hmm.
It's second to none.
Right.
And that match is an example of it. And you're right. And there's a certain history to that building. New Orleans to me is an underrated pro wrestling city. And the great thing about that dome, um, is that it really isn't. It's really unchanged.
Right.
Like
It
there's
is.
some
So right.
cosmetic things that they've changed, but it's
Mhm.
still pretty much the same now as it was then. And even going back, you watch footage like in the 70s, it's pretty much the same building as it always was, which I think adds to the history of that building.
Yeah, and that match is like I said, there's no high spots. It's counter after counter. It's headlock into pin. It's arm drag, and the chops in that match, Dave. I mean, if you watch the end of that match and you see Flair's chest and you see Steamboat's chest, they're beat red, almost bleeding. That's how bad they were beating basically the shit out of each other. So that to me, and it's unbelievable because like you said, you could put all three of those matches in that series on the top five. The fact that I don't have the Wrestle War match or the match in Chicago on my top five is almost criminal because those three matches are incredible. But what's even more incredible is that Flair and Steamboat have both said those three matches don't compare what they did on the house shows back in the early 80s in Mid-Atlantic Wrestling. I would love to go see some of those shows. I think there's a YouTube video, I haven't seen it yet, where it's Flair versus Steamboat. I think it's for the US title, where Andre the Giant is a special guest referee. Now
I
I haven't seen
actually
that match yet.
have that
Oh, do
match.
you?
So Mike, I think you know this, but I have I have a bunch of DVDs, and I said this to Ric Flair, and I think he was kind of he thought I was a bit crazy, but I have like a collage, or of all different Ric Flair's greatest matches, and it's on 35 DVDs. And one of those, the match that you're talking about, the Flair Steamboat match with Andre the Giant as a special guest referee, is on one of those
Wow,
DVDs.
that's incredible.
And the story that they told for the United States Championship, on Mid Atlantic TV, was one of the greatest stories in pro wrestling history. And you were talking about the chops. One of the other matches that's not in our top five, but another great match, and it's kind of forgotten about, Flair Garvin from
Oh,
Starcade '87.
yes.
It's that's why to me Ric Flair is the greatest of all time, because if you really look at his body of work and the matches he had, but with all that different talent
Hmm.
that he went up against.
No
And
doubt.
it's truly the last, to me, world champion, where he's defended that NWA championship all over the world.
Right.
And it's a lost art. And Seth Rollins right now is the WWE World Heavyweight Champion, but he's gonna wrestle it to people who are on, in the WWE in a bubble that travel around. Ric Flair traveled to each and every
Yeah.
territory, each and every organization all around the world defending that NWA World Heavyweight Championship. And I don't think we'll ever see a champion or a wrestler like Ric Flair ever again.
No, and you're so right. I mean, we mentioned one WWE match, one against Shawn Michaels at the end. But even go back when he went there in '92. I mean, his match with Savage at WrestleMania. Listen, I agree with you. It should have been Flair Hogan at WrestleMania 8. But that match between Flair and Savage is really good. His match with Mr. Perfect, Loser Leaves WWE match on Raw was excellent. The match he had with Hogan at Bash of the Beach was awesome. I mean, no matter, I mean, that was '94. And when did he start? '72. I mean, he's still putting out great matches year after year. Listen, I know we always kid with you, 1, 2, Hogan, Flair, Hogan, Flair. Hogan to me was just more emotional for me growing up. But Ric Flair to me, there's nobody on his level. You could argue Shawn Michaels, but when it comes to wrestling matches, I mean, you said 20. We could do a top 50 of Ric Flair matches and keep
You
going.
could, and you can, and we just named at least a dozen
Right.
just in this conversation right now. And listen, I'll say this: Hogan's the greatest box office star in pro wrestling history. I know people argue The Rock or Stone Cold. When it comes to box office and really changing, Stone Cold's a close second,
Hmm.
but to me, Hogan's number one. But I think all around great pro wrestler, whether it's in the ring, on the microphone, I don't think anybody touches Ric Flair. I think Ric Flair is the greatest technical wrestler, the greatest big match wrestler, and I think he's the greatest wrestler on the microphone.
Can't argue, Dave. Thank you so much for joining us. here on Top of the Hops. What's your favorite Ric Flair match? I'd like to hear it. Comment below, like, subscribe. Dave, thank you so much. I hope to do this again with you. Maybe not wrestling, maybe some music. I don't know. I know you're a big heavy metal guy. I'm not,
No,
but I'll
no,
get
but I
into
could
it.
do greatest bands, greatest reunions,
I
greatest
love it.
records, greatest
Yacht rock
concerts.
songs.
I'm down.
Are you into yacht rock?
Of course. I love yacht.
Well, we got to talk a little bit about yacht rock. So thank you so much, guys. Thank you, Dave. We'll see you on another episode of Top of the Hops.